as planned. Instead, we are very much delighted to welcome the Secretary General of the Freie Demokratische Partei, FDP, who has on very short term agreed to speak here today. Bijan Djir-Sarai, welcome to Körber-Stiftung. He will join Britta Sandberg, Paris Bureau Chief of Der Spiegel, for a spotlight interview in cooperation with Der Spiegel. We hope that this will bring light to the questions on where the Free Democrats are headed now. What's the long-term strategy for German foreign policy, and how to balance budgetary discipline with the expectations of Germany's allies. With that, I am now happy to hand it over to Britta Sandberg. The stage is yours.
So, wir können uns setzen. Herr Bijan Djir-Sarai, wir sind sehr
Mr. Djir-Sarai, we are very happy to have you here today, and we are looking forward to the explanation you're going to give us about what happened last week, really. Last Wednesday, after 2 years and 10 minutes, the traffic light coalition consisting of the SPD, the Greens, and the Free Democratic Party was stopped. Your Minister of Finance was dismissed. Was that for you an act of liberation, or was it a dramatic and traumatic event?
Neither nor. So we knew that there would be great changes in store for politics in Germany. The night beforehand, we had the US elections. And in the days before, I also said a new US administration is going to bring about a lot of changes for Europe as well as Germany. And that's why we would need a government ready to act in this situation. That was point number one. And point number two, we need a change in the economic policy of Germany. So 2 points, government ready to act and a new policy in economics is the 2 points. And these are the discussion we had in the coalition committee, and we wanted to sort out the question, is this coalition able to meet the challenges of the times, yes or no? And up front, there was always talk of the autumn of decisions. Will we go in this direction? Will we go in that direction? But the country needs clarity. So everyone was agreed on that the evening then took a remarkable change. I didn't actually see that ahead.
You haven't quite answered my question yet.
You wanted to know whether I'm relieved. So I think there was a discussion in the past days as well. So when will the federal elections be in store? So again, the country needs a decision which way we're going to march. And it has to be clear where Germany is going to develop into and where Europe is going to develop into. So that's why it's good that the electorate now have the possibilities to take a decision. And this is the background. So it's a relief for me on this background. So it's clear what we can do for the country then and what it means for the country.
Okay, ich verstehe das so, dass
you said, says the Spiegel, we never belonged together. It was tormenting and it slowed down the country. And you would have considered another year of the coalition as a lost year. Is that right?
If the coalition had continued in this format, and if there had been no agreement or no understanding with regard to great reforms, especially economic reforms, then from my point of view, it would have been a lost year for Germany if we had just continued 1 year without results.
According to opinion polls, there are many Germans who have a feeling that the FDP, your party, has been the driver why the coalition collapsed. You provoked, your party chairperson proposed a program that was clearly not aligned with the goals of the Greens and the Social Democrats. Would you say this is true? And my second question is, do you think that this image of FDP could be harmful for?
No, I don't agree. It was the coalition of three different political parties. And don't forget, it was a coalition. It wasn't a merger. There's three parties who had different ideas. SPD and the Greens had the trend towards the left, and we are a party of the middle of the road. And so in central question, talk about the economic policies, for instance, economy, finance, budget. So the ideas were very far apart. And so it's clear that parties have three different political parties will have three different sets of ideas. And every time we see this and this ideas, they always said, well, come on, you're provoking the coalition again. Mr. Habeck, the economics minister, is every 2 days is suggesting extra debts, and nobody said it was a provocation. Nobody said in the past it was provocation. Well, that's his opinion. That's the position of his party. So that's what I believe. So without trying to see this negatively or whatever, looking at it in hindsight, three different political parties, three different sets of ideas, and these ideas didn't come together.
Habeck schlägt vor allem ein
Mr. Habeck has proposed a new special fund for the armed forces, for Bundeswehr. We're going to talk about that later. But now let's focus on the timing. You've already talked about the moment in time. Obviously, it was the worst moment you could ever find because it was the day when Trump won the election. And on that very same day, it turned out that Germany can no longer go on that way, and we have an unstable period of time until we have new elections. Germany and Europe are faced with massive foreign policy and security challenges. Did that play a role for you, or are you still concerned that this Germany in the weeks to come could be even less capable of taking decisions and action?
That is why we said we have to have soon the perspective where Germany is going to develop into, and we need new elections soon. And but I just want to try to look at it in the bigger picture now, from my point of view. So somebody, and I used to do foreign policy work as well. So for me, it's clear a new U.S. administration will bring about large changes for Germany and also large changes for Europe. And a new U.S. administration, and above all, the Trump administration. So if you hear what they said during the campaigning, what possibly is in store for us, indeed. So a new Trump administration that will have challenges in the economy, challenges in the trade, and also with regard to foreign and security policies. So, and I am convinced that regardless of the question which administration, be it Democratic or Republican, so that the future U.S. administrations will less and less be interested in the Middle East and less interested in Africa and in less and less interested in Europe. So my impression is that the Americans are going to look at their resources, capacities, and facilities, will focus on China as the system rival. So in a world where this dispute is in the center, so who is going to set the standards in the future? So what's going to happen in the foreign policy, security policy, trade policy? So where are we going to be as Europeans or as Germans? Where are we going to end up? So, and to believe, so I mean, I love the United States, please don't misunderstand me, but to believe that the Americans in such a world are automatically going to represent our interests, from my point of view, that is naive. So we as Europeans now have to be able to represent our interests, to articulate our interests and represent them, and also to uphold our values. So this is what we really urgently need to do. And we also have to do one more thing. I would remind you of the Cold War. It didn't end because the Soviet Union was actually overcome by military. No, it was the economic strength that made the Cold War end, but we don't have that economic power at the moment. And when we look at Germany and the development of Germany over the past 7-8 years, then I do have the impression that the economy in Germany, or the economic location of Germany has lost in competitiveness, has lost in attractiveness. In Germany, we talk about necessary reforms that one should have done in 10 years ago, initiated 10 years ago, but that didn't happen. So the economic strength is necessary so that we, as well as Europe, are economically strong. Economy and finance, both of them go together. It's two sides of the same coin. So that's what we have to do, and that's urgently necessary. And that's, I believe, something that other Europeans are looking at us, how we are going to act and develop in the next near future.
Ihre Einschätzung, was
We all agree on what the role of future Europe should be. You have the same opinion as Foreign Minister Baerbock. She said this morning, we need a Europe that is stronger than ever before, and we need to give more clear-cut support to Ukraine, or we have to increase the level of support that we give to Ukraine. When you look at FDP, you get the feeling that when you look at Europe, you always focus on business, on economic and financial policy aspects. I'm not going to come back to all the details of last week, but there was this proposal made by Chancellor Scholz to raise another 3 billion for Ukraine. And he said we need to take another step. We need to walk an extra mile to support Ukraine. You have rejected this. Is that responsible? Because you know how difficult the situation is from a geopolitical perspective. You always cling to that so-called Schuldenbremse, that debt brake, and you use the argument of the economy to slow down political efforts. And you also slow down efforts to support defense capabilities in Ukraine.
I will answer your question in concrete terms, also with regard to the coalition commission. So you asked two questions. So there was the first question, and this is what I want to answer as well before we move on to the Ukraine. Of course, the subject of economy is extraordinarily important. I mean, it's about innovation. It's about jobs. And especially in the US election campaign, we saw how relevant the subject of economy is. And I am convinced that the economic strength of Europe needs to be restored urgently. And still, nevertheless, of course, our values are relevant. And so we, as Europeans, have got an interest that we live in a rule-based order. And if the world is not rule-based, then if we hadn't this rule-based order, I would assume who would survive. So the Chinese would survive, the Russians would survive, even the Americans would survive, but I believe that we would have bad chances of survival. So that's why it's important that we also have the rules-based society and order. These are our values, and this is what we need to uphold as Germans as well as Europeans. The support for the Ukraine is, of course, extremely important, but what you said, so this is a narrative from the Chancellery. So in other words, you didn't reject the 3 billion? Well, it wasn't about the 3 billion. So the Chancellor just had an interest, and that is to loosen the brake on the debt. And we just pointed out, so we had a constitutional court 1 year ago rule that you cannot circumvent the brake on the debt. You cannot ignore that brake on the debt. So the things that he suggested in that evening, they were neither correct with regard to the Constitutional Court nor with the economy. So I don't want to talk about the session as such. We also told them something else when they said, okay, 3 billion for Ukraine. By the way, the G7 states had 50 billion before that they made available, and that was also an initiative of Germany. So in other words, the G7 industrial nations had already tried so to also support certain, or to count, also to think about new developments of foreign policy also from the US when it's about financing and supporting Ukraine. Now in the session they said 3 billion for the Ukraine, and we said okay, so but we can also take it from the budget. So we don't need to have extra debt. and circumvent the break on debts. But the question back is, what do you believe in this situation? What is more important for Ukraine, the 3 billion or the weapons, to get the weapons that the Ukraine actually asked for us in concrete terms? They asked for Taurus. Why don't we give them Taurus? So that's the question that we confronted the Chancellor with, and he was not able, he didn't want to give us an answer to this, because it's not about the support of Ukraine, but rather about circumventing the break on the debt. I don't want to become emotional now, and I don't want to no, so I don't want to give the impression as if I'm annoyed about them, but it does annoy me, I must say. It does annoy me, because so the support of the Ukraine has also got a history. So I had situation, this coalition, that you had to force the hand of the Chancellor so to support the Ukraine. And from these people, and not in this situation, I'm not going to be told that we were not supporting Ukraine just because we're not allowing them to circumvent the break on the deck. So this narrative from the Chancellor, just ignore that.
Let me summarize. You think you were misunderstood, or at least misinterpreted. This morning we already talked about the Pulse opinion poll conducted by Körber Foundation. Let me mention a few figures. 7% of the respondents are in favor of supporting Ukraine financially. 62% of the people consider it correct to increase our defense budget to plus 3.5% GDP. Our foreign minister this morning said we need to do everything to defend Ukraine. Knowing all of that, and knowing it will take some time until we have elections, there might be a date in February when this election could come. And we also know you are willing and ready to support Ukraine. How far are you, your party, FDP, going to go in order to pass legislation in German parliament so that our whole country doesn't become a lame duck? There is the idea, or even official request, to set up a special fund, the Sondervermögen. That idea was developed and was submitted as a proposal by Robert Habeck. And we know that after the election, extreme right or left-wing forces might be so important, so large, that they could prevent such a fund to be erected. Do you think you could pass such a special fund?
No, not at all. I mean, I don't understand Robert Habeck. He's come up with all these special debt budgets. I mean, you know what special debt budget? In this case, it's debts. So this is the question that the next government needs to answer. We said, first of all, you need to sort that out. First of all, you need to decide when we've got the date for new elections, and then very soon. So then we have to overcome this situation so that the country can actually decide on the way forward. But there is no debate in Germany, so that's a fictitious debate. So the break on debts versus Ukraine, that's not there. I mean, we've got the support of Ukraine, and that's got nothing to do whether you have to take on debt or not. So I'd tell you something more. We're going deep into the politics now. So there's enough money in Germany. So in Germany, we don't have a problem with the income. Our problem in Germany is the expense. So we don't have a handle on the expense. We had more than 1,000 billion in taxes. But as long as we don't ask ourselves the question, as long as the state is not efficient, as where we've got situations of more than half of the budget goes out for social expenses, where we don't even ask whether they actually reached their target, yes or no, then we've got a few fundamental problems. And these problems is something that in the existing coalition, the coalition we had about a week ago, nobody wanted to address this. So with regard to the Bundeswehr army, so we have to set priorities with regard to budgetary discussion. So with regard to security policy, the Bundeswehr, and also foreign policy, diplomacy, we, in the future, we need to be ready in Germany to spend more money. So that's investments in our own future. So we've got the security policy in Germany across the political parties. We actually neglected the security policy. We always thought we live in a wonderful, secure world, We've got friendly neighbors all around, and everyone wants to become like us. And if there's somewhere in the world, or even in Europe, if there's a problem, so take, for instance, Yugoslavia, then the Americans are going to sort it out. That's over. Yes, that's over. That world is over. So the Americans are going to sort it out, and then we're going to have a conference near Bonn, and we'll add some money. And so where we're still very strong is with regard to our morals. We are the world championships in morals in Germany. So everywhere we say German foreign policy needs to be interest and value-based, but we confuse a value-based foreign policy with moralist foreign policy. That's a big mistake we're making in Germany. But what you just said is totally correct. This world is over. This world is over. Now we have to do more. So the American taxpayer is not going to be prepared any longer to pay for the security architecture in Europe. So we need to do more as Europeans, as Germans, for our own security. And that will require that the mistakes we made over the past decades need to be sorted out, and we need to have a future perspective. That's going to be a big challenge. That alone, to get that sorted out in the budget for the next few years. Like in 2028, there's a special debt budget is over. Then we have to ask ourselves, so what about the support of the Bundeswehr, and the support for their own security architecture is going to be reflected in the budget of Germany?
Obviously, you have to ask this question much earlier, because I think the budget period will end in 2027. So I can note that not only your coalition partners misunderstood you, also some people in the hall misunderstood you. So far, we always thought the debt break is so important to you that you would not agree to spending money. Now you say we need to spend more money on foreign policy.
I just want to explain that a break on debt is not an invention of the FDP. I wish that we developed it at the Hans-Dietrich Genscher House. No, this is the Constitution saying that. And with the ruling of the Constitutional Court, there's a very clear instruction of how to handle the break on the debts. Because the ruling of the Constitutional Court didn't only have consequences for the budget at national level, but also for the budget policy of the Bundesländer and the communities, local communities. You mustn't forget that. So the break on the debt is a question of equality for generation. We love to talk about sustainability in Germany. That's good. So, but we forgot in Germany that also financial policy needs to be sustainable. So no policy, so no debt at the cost of the future generations. So now we've got a different world than about a few years ago. So now we've got the inflation in Europe, and we've got a totally different interest development than a few years ago. So, and in this situation, who would have a debt policy, it needs to be clear that at the end of the day, you endanger the action of the state, because we need to pay all of that back, and that's a totally different situation, different dimension than, like, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And again, that needs to be considered. One last thought. So the break on debts also has an economic development component. So there's also flexibility with this component is there. However, at the end of the day, the break on the debts is the protection against such politicians that the taxpayers' money can just be distributed arbitrarily. We have to protect the people, especially politicians who love to just throw money at problems.
All right, we have a couple of minutes left. Let's venture a look into the future. It seems we are going to have our next election on the 23rd of February. That could be the date, which means the Chancellor in December would propose a vote of confidence. As I hear, your party feels very much relieved. But when we look at the opinion polls, your popularity has dropped 3%, so you're not sure would you get be above the 5% hurdle. And that would be the only chance for you to be part of a government. And I think also this fact is interesting internationally. What do you think will be the government, the next government that will have to tackle all these huge international issues. What is your policy for the election campaign? One could say you were very close to the CDU, CSU. Well, of course, parties do their election campaigns individually, but who do you like to work with?
First of all, it's very nice of you that you mentioned the percentages of our voters backing. Thank you for spreading it out in front of an international audience here. The poor ratings. But I have to say, since Wednesday, you won 1,300 new members. Yes, and the surveys are changing. But the Greens get 5,500. Well, I'm happy for the Greens, but the surveys and the polls, the situation that we might have in a few weeks is not going to be the situation in which we are now. And so if you talk about the polls and the ratings for the FDP, I think only us are interested. We are interested. I don't think the international audience is really interested in that. I think the first institutes will see the FDP above 5%. Okay, you have to live with us, obviously. And what about the next government, federal government, what it was going to look like? I can't tell you that, no. But the next federal government will need to achieve a few things. So it needs to work on the failures of 2 or 3 coalitions before that. They need to correct them. And the years of Merkel chancellorship where many important decisions were not taken. So we didn't have the time to talk about things like, for instance, the energy policy. And when Germany, in part, we've got strategically wrong decisions taken. So all of these things still play a role, a big role, and connected with the economic change that hasn't happened, which we wanted, but we couldn't do in the old coalition. So in other words, there's big challenges we're facing in the new federal government. And the geopolitical subject that we just touched upon, they also play a big role. So, however, at the end of the day, there needs to be a federal government that has a strong contribution so that in Europe we can move together closer and at long last, as Europeans in this world order that we're living in now, that we've got a joint voice. So we would need to speak with one voice.
Mit wem dann werden?
We'll see with whom. One last and brief question. Are you concerned that the right and left-wing forces like AfD, like Alliance Sarah Wagenknecht, are you concerned they could win many more votes and have 25% together?
Sehr große Sorge.
Of course, I'm very concerned, but I don't belong to the people who just withdraw and only talk about anxieties and fears. So the decisive question is, what do we as Democrats put up against that? So from my point of view, this means quite clearly the problems that we have in this country, we need to solve them. We shouldn't look away. We shouldn't gloss it over. No, we need to solve the problems. So a few weeks ago, so now we talked a lot about the economic development in the country. However, so we need to solve the problems. So we need to maintain prosperity. We need to increase prosperity. That's what we need to achieve. The best policy to against populism are safe jobs and good jobs. So by the way, that's also the best social policy when people have got safe jobs. That's what we need to do. So a big subject that also played a role in the elections and is also the subject of migration. When you talk to mayors or district governors, yeah, they've been telling you since a long time that the migration policy is overtaxing the country, both with regard to quality as well as to quantity. So there's the clear expectation towards politics in Berlin and Brussels with regard to control and limiting migration. We need to improve much more. And these things is what we need to solve. So if the democratic parties cannot solve these issues, populists are going to benefit from this. And that's why we need to solve the problems we have. And that's the task for all Democrats in this country.
Vielen Dank, es war schön, dass Sie heute da waren und dass Sie sich in diesen wilden Berliner Zeiten Zeit für uns genommen haben.
Sehr gerne. Dankeschön.